National Electrical Code Section 110.34 addresses working space and clearances around electrical equipment operating at 600 volts, nominal or less. This section mandates sufficient access and working space for personnel to safely operate and maintain such equipment. The general rule in 110.34 dictates a minimum depth of clear working space in front of electrical equipment. The specific depth required depends on the voltage to ground and the condition of the space opposite the equipment. These conditions are firstly condition 1, where there is exposed live parts on one side and grounded parts on the other side, or grounded parts on both sides. Secondly, condition 2, which is where there are exposed live parts on one side and insulated parts on the other side. And thirdly, condition 3, which is exposed live parts on both sides. For equipment operating at 150 volts or less to ground, the minimum clear working space depths are 3 feet for condition 1, 3 feet for condition 2, and 3 feet for condition 3. For equipment operating between 151 volts and 600 volts, the minimum clear working space depths increase to 3 feet for condition 1, 3.5 feet for condition 2, and 4 feet for condition 3. The width of the working space must be at least 30 inches or the width of the equipment, whichever is greater, ensuring sufficient lateral movement for personnel. The height of the working space must extend from the grade, floor, or platform to a height of at least 6.5 feet or the height of the equipment, whichever is greater. Adequate illumination is crucial for safe operation and maintenance. 110.34d requires sufficient illumination to permit safe and effective work. The location of lighting outlets should avoid casting shadows that could obscure critical components or create hazards. Equipment likely to require examination, adjustment, servicing, or maintenance while energized must have convenient illumination. Obstructions should not be placed in the working space. 110.34e prohibits any storage of materials or placement of obstacles that could impede access to the working space or create hazards. This ensures that personnel can quickly and safely reach the equipment in case of emergencies. There are exceptions to the general clearance requirements. These exceptions recognize specific scenarios where reduced clearances are permissible without compromising safety. Exception number 1 of 110.34a addresses situations where access is required only to the rear of enclosed equipment. If the equipment can be de-energized for access to the rear, the working clearance of the rear is not mandated. This exception acknowledges that certain maintenance tasks, such as cable terminations, may only be performed when the equipment is de-energized, allowing for reduced clearances in these specific instances. Exception number 2 of 110.34a pertains to dead front assemblies. If all exposed live parts are located on one side of the working space and are suitably protected, the distance can be reduced. This exception recognizes that dead front construction, where live parts are enclosed, minimizes the risk of accidental contact and allows for reduced clearances. Exception number 3 of 110.34a allows for reduced working space for equipment operating at 600 volts or less that is installed in a room or enclosure that is accessible only to qualified persons. This exception recognizes that qualified persons are trained to work safely around electrical equipment and are aware of the potential hazard. Therefore, reduced clearances are permissible in these controlled environments. Metal-clad switchgear typically houses low-voltage electrical distribution equipment such as circuit breakers, fuses, and bus bars. The internal components are enclosed in metal compartments, providing a high degree of protection and isolation. Access to the rear connections of metal-clad switchgear is often limited and may require the removal of panels or covers. In many cases, the rear connections are only accessible when the equipment is de-energized. Considering the NEC requirements and the characteristics of metal-clad switchgear, the exception outlined in 110.34a on exception no. 1 is applicable when access to the rear connections is only required when the equipment is de-energized. In such cases, the minimum clear working space depth in front of the switchgear can be less than 30 inches, provided it is sufficient to allow for safe operation and maintenance. However, it is crucial to consider several factors when determining the appropriate working space. Firstly, the specific dimensions and configuration of the switchgear must be considered. Different models and manufacturers may have varying requirements for access and maintenance. Secondly, the nature of the tasks to be performed must be evaluated. Routine inspections and minor adjustments may require less space than major repairs or component replacements. Thirdly, the qualifications and training of the personnel performing the work must be taken into account. Qualified persons are better equipped to work safely in confined spaces and may require less clearance. Fourthly, the presence of other equipment or obstacles in the vicinity of the switchgear must be considered. Sufficient space must be provided to allow for safe movement and operation. Fifthly, the manufacturer's instructions and recommendations must be followed. The manufacturer may specify minimum clearance requirements based on the specific design and performance characteristics of the switchgear. To ensure compliance with the NEC and promote electrical safety, a thorough assessment of the specific installation and operating conditions is essential. A qualified electrical engineer or inspector can provide guidance on determining the appropriate working space and clearance requirements for metal-clad switchgear. This assessment should include a review of the equipment specifications, the intended maintenance procedures, and the qualifications of the personnel performing the work. In addition to the NEC requirements, other applicable standards and regulations may need to be considered. For example, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration (OSHA) has specific requirements for working space around electrical equipment in industrial settings. State and local building codes may also have additional requirements. Regular inspections and maintenance are crucial for ensuring the continued safe operation of metal-clad switchgear. These activities should be performed by qualified personnel who are trained to recognize and address potential hazards. The inspection and maintenance program should include regular checks of the working space to ensure that it remains free of obstructions and that adequate illumination is provided. Any deficiencies or hazards should be promptly corrected to prevent accidents and injuries. In summary, while the NEC generally requires a minimum of 30 inches of clearance in front of electrical equipment, exceptions exist for specific situations. Metal-clad switchgear, where access to the rear connections is only required when the equipment is de-energized, qualifies for an exception under 110.34a on exception No. 1. However, the minimum clearance must still be sufficient to allow for safe operation and maintenance. A thorough assessment of the specific installation and operating conditions is essential to determine the appropriate working space and clearance requirements. Consulting with a qualified electrical engineer or inspector is recommended to ensure compliance with the NEC and promote electrical safety. Remember that electrical safety is paramount. Always de-energize equipment before accessing rear connections or performing any maintenance that could expose personnel to live parts. Use appropriate personal protective equipment and follow established safety procedures. By adhering to these guidelines, you can minimize the risk of electrical shock and ensure a safe working environment.